She cycled 500 kilometres, commanded 7,000 men, and was the Gestapo's most wanted. But was Nancy Wake's high profile a liability or a deliberate SOE strategy? Forget the medals and the Hollywood hype. We're looking at the after-action reports to see how a gilded runaway became exactly the kind of distraction that London needed. I'm Gavin Wilson. My service taught me that the difference between a successful mission and a total wipeout often comes down to whether headquarters in London actually understood the ground truth. Today on the Contrarian Chronicles, we're auditing the White Mouse. We're going past the charm to look at the catastrophic failures, the rolled up networks, and the cold mathematics of the SOE. They call her the White Mouse, the Gestapo's most wanted, a spy who killed Nazis with her bare hands, cycled 500 kilometres through enemy territory, and commanded 7,000 resistance fighters. The legend paints Nancy Wake as the ultimate lone wolf, a fearless operative who outsmarted the entire German war machine through sheer audacity and charm. But if you look past the medals and the Hollywood mythology, a more complex story emerges. A story of an amateur who learned through catastrophic failure. A woman whose early networks were rolled up and destroyed. And a high-profile agent who may have been exactly what SOE needed. Not despite being visible to the Gestapo, but because of it. Today we're pulling the file on Nancy Wake. We're going past the legend to look at the failures, the learning curve, and the uncomfortable question: was the White Mouse a brilliant operative or brilliant bait? Nancy Grace Augusta Wake was born on August 30th, 1912 in Wellington, New Zealand, the youngest of 6 children. In 1914, when Nancy was just 2 years old, her family moved to North Sydney, Australia. Shortly after, her father Charles, a journalist, abandoned the family, leaving her mother Ella to raise the 6 children alone. Nancy's childhood was marked by poverty and instability. By age 16, she'd had enough. Nancy ran away from home and worked as a nurse in rural New South Wales. Then, when an aunt died and left her £200, a substantial sum in 1928, Nancy did what any self-respecting rebel would do. She bought a ticket to New York. From New York, Nancy moved to London, trained herself as a journalist, and by the early 1930s she was working in Paris as a European correspondent for Hearst newspapers. She was living the glamorous expatriate life: parties, assignments, adventure. And then, in 1933, she witnessed something that would change her life forever. As a journalist, Nancy travelled to Vienna and saw Nazi groups randomly beating Jewish men and women in the streets. She watched the rise of Adolf Hitler with her own eyes. And in that moment, she made a decision that would define the rest of her life. She would fight the Nazis. In 1937, Nancy met Henri Edmond Fiocca, a wealthy French industrialist. They married in November 1939, just months after the war began. Nancy settled into life in Marseille as a wealthy socialite, improving her French and, according to those who knew her, picking up some extremely colourful language in the local markets. When Germany invaded France in May 1940, Nancy's gilded life shattered. Unlike many in her social circle, Nancy didn't retreat. She became an ambulance driver. And then, after France fell, she joined something far more dangerous: the French resistance. In 1940, Nancy Wake joined Captain Ian Garrow's escape network, which would later become known as the Pat O'Leary line. Her job was simple, in theory, catastrophic in practice: act as a courier, moving Allied airmen and refugees from northern France to Marseille, and then over the Pyrenees into neutral Spain. Nancy was good at it. She was charming, she spoke perfect French, and she had the social network and connections to move through checkpoints with a wink and a flirtation. The Gestapo nicknamed her the White Mouse because of her ability to slip through their traps. But here's the contrarian reality that the legend often skips. Nancy Wake wasn't working alone, and the networks she operated in were fragile, amateurish, and constantly being penetrated by German intelligence. I've seen similar dynamics in counterinsurgency operations. The difference between a professional network and an amateur one isn't courage, it's compartmentalisation. In a professional network, if one cell gets rolled up, the damage is contained. In an amateur network, one arrest leads to 3 more, then 10 more, until the whole thing collapses. The Pat O'Leary line was betrayed multiple times. In December 1941, Harold Cole, a British traitor codenamed Paul, was captured and gave the Germans information that led to dozens of arrests, nearly destroying the network in northern France. In March 1943, another infiltrator, Roger Leneuveur, betrayed the line's leader, Albert Juris, who was arrested by the Gestapo. Nancy herself was operating in a surveillance goldmine. The Gestapo tapped her telephone. They intercepted her mail. They knew who she was. By late 1942, when the Germans occupied Vichy France and gained unrestricted access to the south, Nancy Wake became the Gestapo's #1 most wanted person in France, with a 5 million franc bounty on her head. And here's the uncomfortable question: how does an amateur courier, no matter how charming, stay alive for 3 years with the Gestapo actively hunting her, tapping her phone and watching her every move? The answer is that Nancy didn't always win. In early 1943, Nancy was arrested in Toulouse along with an entire trainload of people. She was interrogated for 4 days. She was beaten, but she stuck to her cover story and gave nothing away. During my service, I went through some resistance to interrogation training. The instructors told us, stick to the big 4. It's 6 now, no matter what. I did 4 hours in the box and nearly broke. Keep in mind, there was no physical torture, perhaps a little physical abuse. 4 days in interrogation is an eternity. Most people break in hours. The fact that Nancy held means she had either exceptional training or exceptional stubbornness, possibly both. Nancy was only released because Albert Juris, the head of the Pat O'Leary line, took an enormous risk, using a fake identity card and claiming to be a senior member of the French milice. He stormed into the prison and told the French commissar that Nancy was his mistress and that she was hiding from her husband to protect their affair. The commissaire, apparently a romantic, released Nancy. But the walls were closing in. The network had been betrayed again. Nancy's husband Henri begged her to leave France while she still could. On her 6th attempt to cross the Pyrenees, after multiple failures, near captures and one instance where she literally threw herself out of a moving train to escape, Nancy finally made it to Spain in June 1943. Henri stayed behind to settle their affairs, but he was captured by the Gestapo. They tortured Henri to find out where Nancy had gone. He gave them nothing. He died in 1943, and Nancy wouldn't learn of his death until after the liberation of France in 1944. When Nancy Wake arrived in Britain in June 1943, she was recruited by the Special Operations Executive, the secret organisation Winston Churchill had created to set Europe ablaze. SOE's job was to conduct espionage, sabotage and support resistance movements in occupied Europe. And they wanted Nancy Wake. She had 3 years of field experience. She knew the terrain, she spoke perfect French, and the Germans already knew her face. That last part is important. Hold that thought. Nancy entered SOE training, and here is where the legend meets reality. According to the official training reports, Nancy was a real Australian bombshell, tremendous vitality, flashing eyes, everything she did well. She was described as a very good and fast shot with excellent fieldcraft. But the same reports also note that Nancy was argumenting with the directing staff, missed multiple early morning runs because she felt unwell, and was once caught drinking and was temporarily dismissed from the course. She only returned after intervention from Ian Garrow and a former evader she'd helped escape, who was now a colonel in SOE. The truth is, Nancy Wake wasn't a natural soldier. She was a journalist who'd become a courier who was now being turned into a commando. She complained about the silent killing training, the parachute jumps, the explosives, the long marches. One of her instructors noted that she argued constantly about the necessity of map reading. I ran promotion courses for regular units. In the modern military, training is difficult, but not nearly as difficult as it was 30 years ago, much less as rigorous as it was in World War II. You learn quickly there are 2 types of candidates. The ones who complain but perform, and the ones who complain and really struggle. Nancy was the former. Her training reports show she argued with every instructor, but she passed every test. That's not a disciplinary problem. That's a stress indicator. She was pushing back because she was terrified, but she did the work anyway. Here's what the SOE saw that others didn't. Nancy Wake was a survivor. She'd been operating under active Gestapo surveillance for 3 years and was still alive. She'd been arrested, interrogated and released. She'd crossed the Pyrenees after 47 hours of hard climbing when most people would have quit. And, most importantly, the Germans knew Nancy's face. On April 29, 1944, Nancy Wake was parachuted back into France as part of a 3-person SOE team codenamed Freelance. Her codename was Hélène. Her mission was to liaise with the Maquis resistance group in the Auvergne region and coordinate arms drops in preparation for D-Day. But here's the contrarian question. Why would SOE send their most wanted agent, a woman with a 5 million franc bounty and a face the Gestapo knew, back into occupied France? The conventional answer is that she was skilled, experienced, and knew the terrain. The contrarian answer is Nancy Wake was bait. In intelligence operations, there's a concept called a lightning rod. You create a high-profile target that draws enemy resources away from your real objectives. Nancy Wake was famous. The Gestapo had nicknamed her the White Mouse because she had evaded them so often. They put a bounty on her head that made her the most wanted person in France. Every German intelligence officer in the south knew her face from wanted posters. And SOE parachuted her right back in. Think about this from the Gestapo's perspective. You've spent 3 years hunting the White Mouse. You've tapped phones, run surveillance, interrogated suspects. You've put up posters. Then, in April 1944, 2 months before D-Day, she reappears in central France. How many resources would you dedicate to finding her? How many agents would you pull from other operations? How many checkpoints would you reinforce? How many informants would you activate? How many man-hours would you burn trying to recapture the woman who'd humiliated you for 3 years? During the Gulf War, coalition forces used elaborate radio deceptions to convince Iraqi commanders the main attack would come from the sea, not the desert. Entire Iraqi divisions sat on beaches waiting for an amphibious assault that never came. In the actual desert, real US and UK armoured divisions hid under strict radio silence. When we invaded Iraq, the Iraqi army was caught completely off guard. Coalition divisions swept through the western desert unopposed. My unit captured over 350 Iraqi conscripts, and they were in such poor condition that they surrendered as soon as they saw us. They'd been positioned to defend against a threat that never materialised, undersupplied and demoralised. They weren't interested in fighting, they were interested in surviving and, as they'd not been fed for days, eating. That is what successful deception looks like. The enemy is defeated before they even see you coming. The principle is simple. Make the enemy commit resources to the wrong place at the wrong time. The Gestapo spent enormous resources hunting Nancy Wake. Resources that were not being used to hunt other, quieter SOE networks. Resources that weren't breaking codes, tracking supply drops or preparing for the Allied invasion. Nancy Wake may have been the most successful decoy in the history of intelligence operations, and she probably never knew it. But here's the thing. Whether she was bait or not, Nancy Wake was genuinely effective once she got to work. When Nancy Wake landed in the Auvergne in April 1944, Resistance leader Henri Tardivar found her tangled in a tree, her parachute caught in the branches. He remarked, "I hope that all the trees in France bear such beautiful fruit this year." Nancy's response, "Don't give me that French shit." Nancy had arrived to do a job, and she wasn't interested in romance. Her mission was to organise, arm and coordinate the scattered Maquis groups in preparation for D-Day. She was given command of approximately 7,000 fighters, men who had little training, less discipline and a deep distrust of foreigners, especially women. We see them here in the streets of Chartres, the raw reality of the resistance. They don't look like an army. They look like a problem. But under Wake, these disparate groups became a surgical strike force. At first, the Maquis refused to work with her. They wanted the money and the weapons SOE could provide, but they didn't want to take orders from a woman. Nancy had to prove herself. And prove herself Nancy did. Don't mistake her for a mascot. Nancy Wake was a pragmatist operating in a world of moral greys. When her Maquis discovered a young German woman working as a spy among them, the men hesitated. Social conditioning, the ingrained resistance to executing a woman, paralysed them. Nancy didn't hesitate them. She told them that if they wouldn't pull the trigger, she would do it herself. Nancy understood the cold arithmetic of insurgency. One spy left alive meant 7,000 dead fighters. I learned this calculus studying operational failures. Every compromised position, every blown operation, every leaked plan traces back to a single security failure. In counterinsurgency, the mathematics are brutal. One informant can kill an entire network. Nancy understood this before she ever wore a uniform. The men found their resolve. According to Nancy's own account, the spy spat at her and stripped naked before facing the firing squad. Nancy showed no regrets. She later said, "I was not a very nice person, and it didn't put me off my breakfast." This was the leader the Maquis needed. Someone who understood that sentiment was a luxury they could not afford. And the results of this cold-blooded discipline? Look at the ledger for the battles in the Auvergne. Nancy organised massive parachute drops of weapons and ammunition. She trained fighters in guerrilla tactics, and when the German sent forces to destroy the Maquis strongholds in Montmouchet in June 1944, Nancy didn't just coordinate, she fought. The Germans were so rattled by the White Mouse and her irregulars, they diverted 22,000 soldiers, including armoured units and air support, to crush them. Here's the math of the Auvergne campaign from April to August 1944. German forces 22,000. German casualties 1,400. Maquis casualties 100. That's a 14-to-1 kill ratio. When I first saw those numbers in military history courses, I assumed they were exaggerated. Guerrilla units don't produce kill ratios like that. Not against professional armies with armour and air support, but the records from both sides confirm it. The Germans documented their own casualties. The French resistance kept meticulous records. The numbers are real. How? Terrain, discipline and force multiplication. The Maquis knew every mountain pass. They had interior lines of communication, and they were armed with weapons that turned farmers into legitimate threats. Sten guns, Bren guns and captured German equipment that could be resupplied from the enemy's own dead. In the history of guerrilla warfare, this isn't just a victory. It's a masterclass in asymmetrical combat. Nancy Wake didn't just survive the war, she ran a high-efficiency killing machine that tied down an entire German division during the most critical phase of the Normandy campaign. During one raid, Nancy reportedly killed an SS sentry with her bare hands using a judo chop to the throat she'd learned in SOE training. In a post-war interview, she said, "They taught us this judo chop stuff with the flat of the hand at SOE. I practiced away at it, but this was the only time I used it. Whack! And it killed him all right. I was really surprised." But her most famous exploit came when disaster struck. During a German attack, Nancy's radio operator, Dennis Rake, was forced to burn his coat and destroy his radio to prevent them from being captured. Without radio contact, the freelance team couldn't call in supply drops or coordinate with London. The nearest working SOE radio was in Châteauroux, over 500-kilometre trip through German-occupied territory. Nancy Wake borrowed a bicycle and rode it for 72 hours straight, crossing multiple German checkpoints to reach the radio, send her message to London and ride back. When she finally got off the bike, she later said, "I felt as if I had a fire between my legs. I couldn't stand up, I couldn't sit down, I couldn't walk." I once took part in a 24-hour march carrying full kit. By hour 15, you're not thinking clearly anymore. You're operating on muscle memory and spite. Every step hurts. Really hurts. The fact that Nancy rode a bike for 72 consecutive hours through hostile territory, negotiating checkpoints, maintaining her cover story, staying alert for patrols, that's not just physical endurance. That's operational discipline under conditions that would break most trained soldiers, myself included. When asked in a post-war interview what she was most proud of during the war, Nancy didn't mention the kills, the raids, or the medals. She said the bike ride. After D-Day, Nancy's role shifted from coordination to combat. Her Maquis forces engaged German troops retreating through the Auvergne, harassing supply lines and tying down divisions that could have reinforced the Normandy defences. By the time American forces invaded southern France in August 1944, Nancy Wake's resistance groups had become a genuine military force. Her friend Henri Tardivar was badly wounded and lost a leg. During a victory celebration in Vichy, Nancy learned that her husband Henri had been tortured and executed by the Gestapo. In mid-September 1944, with their mission complete, the freelance team returned to Britain. Nancy Wake emerged from the war as one of the most decorated women in history. She received the George Medal from the United Kingdom, the Medal of Freedom from the United States, the Médaille de la Résistance from France, 3 Croix de Guerre from France, the Légion d'honneur from France, Knight in 1970, Officer in 1988, Companion of the Order of Australia in 2004, and the RSA badge in gold from New Zealand in 2006. She was celebrated in France as a national hero. But when she returned to Australia, she found something unexpected. Silence. Nancy worked briefly for the British Air Ministry's Intelligence Department, attached to the embassies in Paris and Prague. In 1949, she ran as a Liberal candidate in the Australian federal election for the seat of Barton, running against Herbert Everett, the Deputy Prime Minister. She lost narrowly, 53% to 47%. She tried again in 1951 and came within 250 votes of winning. But politics wasn't her calling. In December 1957, she married John Forward, an RAF officer, and they lived quietly in Australia for decades. They never had children. Nancy tried to settle into civilian life, but by all accounts, she struggled. She was haunted by Henri's death. She felt guilty that he died protecting her secret. Too often, veterans who come back from operational deployments can't adjust. The transition from high-stakes decision-making to civilian routine creates a void that medals don't fill. That, or being unable to process the traumas they have either experienced directly or witnessed firsthand. Nancy Wake spent 4 years in a world where every decision mattered, where she commanded thousands and the outcomes were measured in lives saved or lost. Then she went home to a country that didn't understand what she'd done and a political system that didn't know what to do with her. John Forward died in 1997 after 40 years of marriage. In 2001, Nancy left Australia for the last time and moved to London, where she lived at the Stafford Hotel. The hotel rarely charged her for expenses. She spent most of her time at the bar with a gin and tonic in her hand. In 2003, she moved to the Royal Star and Garter Home for disabled ex-servicemen and women in Richmond, London. She lived there until her death on August 7th, 2011, less than 1 month before her 99th birthday. According to her wishes, her ashes were scattered near the village of Vernay near Montlucon, the operational area where she commanded the Maquis. So, was Nancy Wake a hero, or was she the most expensive piece of bait in the SOE's arsenal? The romanticised history books want the hero. They want the woman who strangled a sentry, cycled 500 kilometres through enemy lines and commanded 7,000 fighters with a 14-to-1 kill ratio. And she was that woman. But the ledgers suggest something more calculated. By turning Nancy Wake into the White Mouse, a high-profile £5 million target, the SOE forced the Germans to commit 22,000 troops and the full attention of the Gestapo to a single mountainous region of central France. Every German soldier hunting Nancy Wake was a soldier not defending the Normandy beaches. Every Gestapo agent tailing her network was an agent not breaking the radio operators in Paris. The numbers tell the story. While Nancy's Maquis inflicted 1,400 casualties on a force over 3 times their size, they also served another purpose. They drew fire. They made noise. They became impossible to ignore. Maybe the bait theory doesn't diminish her bravery. Maybe it's the ultimate compliment. London didn't just trust her to fight. They trusted her to be the eye of the storm while quieter, deadlier operations worked in the shadows. The official SOE historian M.R.D. Foote noted that many of the stories in Nancy's autobiography, The White Mouse, are not verifiable from other sources. The line between legend and truth is slim. And in intelligence work, sometimes the legend is the mission. Nancy Wake was genuinely brave. She earned every medal. The 14-to-1 kill ratio wasn't propaganda. It was mathematics. But she was also human. She made mistakes. She learned on the job. She survived when others didn't, including her husband Henri, who died under Gestapo torture while protecting her. Nancy never truly reconciled with the peace. She lost Henri. She lost the adrenaline. She lost the clarity of purpose that comes from fighting an enemy you can see. She lived her life as she fought, on her own terms, at her own pace, and with a deep distrust of the stories told by those who weren't there. The fact she appeared not to have what we now call PTSD is just another miracle in the long list of miracles Nancy Wake achieved. In 2003, when asked about her wartime experiences, Nancy said, "I hate war, but if it has to be fought, it has to be won." I spent 4 decades in uniform, and I've never heard a better summary of the professional military mindset. Not glory, not adventure, not heroism, just the recognition that some fights are necessary, and if they're necessary, they need to be won. The question isn't whether Nancy Wake was brave. She was. The question is whether the most dangerous weapon in the intelligence world is always a gun or a bomb, or sometimes just a legend that draws the enemy's fire away from people doing the quietest, deadliest work. The audit is complete. Nancy Wake proved that a single, well-placed asset can derail an empire. But what happens when an empire tries to solve its security problem with stone instead of tradecraft? For centuries, we've been told the Great Wall of China was an impenetrable shield, a masterpiece of isolationist strength. But as an analyst, I look at 13,000 miles of brick and mortar, and I don't see a victory. I see a massive regulatory glitch. It's a 2,000-year case study in the sunk cost fallacy, where a superpower spent its entire GDP on a static defence system that didn't just fail to keep the Mongols out, it actually bankrupted the very civilization it was meant to protect. If you want to see how another woman used data instead of deception to change warfare, check out our video on Florence Nightingale. Or if you want to see how a leader's visibility doomed an entire rebellion, watch our breakdown of Boudica. And if you want to see how legendary technology fails when the logistics collapse, visit our file on the Tiger One. I'm Gavin Wilson, and this is the Contrarian Chronicles. Pull the file, check the facts, and remember that the greatest heroes are often the ones whose names we've never learned, because they were too smart to become famous. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next Chronicle.